My name is Glenn Sandifer. I currently serve as an executive within the security industry, but I've also written a book. The book is How to Get Great Dating Outcomes in a Modern World. There are two parts available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible. And you can visit us at tmgbookseries.com, TMG Book Series as well on all the social media sites. So,
Perfect. So, first and foremost, I do want to thank you for joining me today. And I know we've had a little bit of humor in regards to what we're going to talk about, but
yeah.
bring us completely up to speed, my friend. What have you been up to, and how are you trying to make a difference in this crazy dating market world?
Well, I will say I just one is just being a testimony to wanting to be and have good results. So I have a wonderful wife, a significant other who is not only a great partner in every area, but a great friend and a confidant. You don't get there just by happenstance. So the things that I talk about on my channels and in my books is exactly the process that I went through to learn that. So I've been spending more time on several different podcasts, working with brand new content creators, circling back around with you and your audience, then also working on the third book. So the third book is currently in the editing stage. And once that is launched, we'll have that book and we'll have part three that'll be available at the end of the summer. And then starting next month is when I start doing my speaking. So coming to a town near you, I will have all of those dates on my website. But a lot of it for the first half of the year is going to be around business and relationship management and culture in business and how that impacts people. And for me, it's always a twinge of, all right, what's going on in your household? What's going on with your life? Because you ain't showing up the way I need you to show up here. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and just enjoying time as we transition from the winter to the spring as of this recording with the family.
Perfect. Since we last spoke, I want to share something with you. Four of my friends, all women, are looking to get a divorce, and
Why?
tis the season, as they say. And you want to jump right into the why already,
No, let me get my paperwork because this is what this is. I just
right?
posted a video talking, and I said I'm exhausted three times in the video, and I was like, "Ooh, I gotta edit that down." But okay,
Yeah,
audience, that's a
audience, we're
clicker.
ready. So
Go
four of
ahead.
them are going through a divorce, and I was actually at lunch and I was speaking to one of my friends, and she asked me about one of the ones who are looking to get a divorce. And to be honest with you, I thought the question was a setup and a trap.
It
So I
was
navigated very accordingly. But the reason why they're looking to move on from their marriages is that what was discussed, I guess, in the beginning of it and the expectations and maybe the goals of the relationship, of the marriage, sorry, they weren't being met. And the unfortunate part about it is in all four cases, they waited years to make this decision, even though it's been going on for as long as it has. In some cases, it's been 5 years, some cases, 10 years. And I look at all these, all four of them, and each of them I've had similar conversations. One of the questions I always asked is, why did you stay this long when you knew that you were so unhappy early on? And there's
okay.
silence. None of them had an answer to that. What are your
Okay.
thoughts?
Well, none of them had an answer to that because they don't know the answer. But let's go back to what we believe here over at TMG. So we believe that the best relationship outcome is one man, one woman in a relationship, long-term commitment, marriage, children, legacy as the output. In there, happiness is a byproduct. I believe too many of us, especially in the Western part of the world, we spend all of our time looking for the happiness quotient instead of focusing on the duty and responsibility quotient that comes specifically into a marriage. So I want to speak to people who are interested in a long-term relationship in marriage. If you're someone who's married and it's already documented that I went through a divorce, happiness wasn't the reason that we split up. Didn't have anything to do with happiness. There were other things that we both missed on the front end that led us to split apart. We couldn't overcome it, and we couldn't overcome it because we were both very immature. What I believe is when the question is asked to someone when they leave, when they stay for a significant period of time, the reason they don't have the answer is because they haven't done the work to figure out the why. most divorces that are filed, 70% are filed by women. Of the 70% that are filing those, 100% of those women, typically around 65 to 70%, are saying irreconcilable differences. That terminology was used by the courts to basically describe disconnect or discontentment. Disconnect or discontentment is not a reason for a divorce. The reasons for a divorce, for what I believe as a Christian, are clearly outlined in the Bible, but that's not the reason people are getting divorced. They typically, it's money, it may be infidelity, but really what we're seeing is not even money and infidelity. People are just they're just tired. They're worn out, and I'm pretty sure your four friends that you've asked that question to are just worn out. They couldn't do it anymore, and they hadn't done the soul searching to understand the why.
I spoke to one of them and I highlighted what you just shared. And one of them, well, the reason why they stayed so long is they knew that once they got a divorce, their lifestyle would change. They got accustomed to a certain lifestyle with this person and with this marriage. And if they were to exit it, they knew that their lifestyle would change. So, for example, they may go from a house to owning a house to renting. They may go from two cars to maybe one car, maybe not even a car. They may go from two vacations a year to maybe one vacation every 2 years. So there's going to be a shift. And one of the concerns I highlighted to this person was that many of the attributes that are in your marriage that are positive, such as the person is a good father, the person is responsible, the person is accountable. There's a lot of women out there who are going to say, hey, if you don't want him, pass him over here.
Mm,
Because we sometimes think that we have to have every single thing we want in a marriage, but that's not necessarily the case in what I believe, because in what I believe, to your point, it's about duty. Two people came together and they said, this is what we want to do. We have a duty to the family crest. Let's grow it. Let's promote it. It's going to be everything that we do. Happiness, love will come from that, but it's not what we're pursuing to
yeah,
be married. Would you agree?
I 100%. I'm already on record with that. I say three things are the byproducts of a thriving marriage: happiness, love, and lifestyle. So let's start with lifestyle. I obviously do understand if, and here's what I believe: if a woman stays home, raises four kids, and then after 25 years they mutually decide to get divorced, you split the assets down the middle. If someone is already wealthy and he's 48 and he marries a 28-year-old, she don't do anything but come and walk into a good situation, and they get divorced after five. She don't get half. The reason is the first woman put the investment in and took a chance. I often talk about making a deal and making a buying decision for women has to happen much earlier, and they have to be wiser in their picking. So if you are a woman and you're of college age, you're not going to be around so many eligible men who are also trying to aspire to the same thing. That's why college is the best time for women in particular, especially women who identify as modern and above. You want to go find your man there because you make a buying decision based off of the characteristics you want in your man, and you're going to have the best crop of them. If you're going to the same school, guys, you have similar beliefs and similar values. Going to a Christian college, HBCU, PWI, state school, private, doesn't matter. You have similar ideals, and that's the reason you're there. So make that buying decision, and then over a 25-year period, the result happiness comes from we made a plan, we put it on paper, we executed it, we struggled through the execution, but we still made it to the end. Love is you see me through sickness, you see me through a job loss, you see me through the loss of a family member, you see me through a big health issue, you see me through an emotional issue, and I appreciate you. So the attachment of love comes over time, and it really comes through diverse trials. And then when you start talking about the lifestyle component, no one is guaranteed any lifestyle except for what they can provide. So if you stay in a relationship because of the resources and the lifestyle that you have, be okay with the outcome of that, that you have no chance at happiness and no chance at true love.
I know many times people would turn to the church, for example, right, to help with the three things that you mentioned, because that's in theory, the cream of the crop. I know churches have changed quite a bit over the years, but you had singles ministry, for what I remember, and you had people that were quote unquote vetted. You didn't necessarily hear, it may have happened, but you didn't hear about two people going to church. One is married and he has the girlfriend who's at the church and they're doing their thing. Like people were vetted to make sure that Glenn is single, Turin is single, Susie's single, Andrea's single, and you are operating under the goals and the rules of the Bible and the expectations and the standards. But I've noticed a shift, especially in the black church, where you have people leaving because it appears that modern ideals are now entering the church, and there's a little bit of an imbalance when it comes to the men that's in that church. Have you seen something similar?
Absolutely. I've seen two things that are similar. So let's first talk about the transition of single ministries. So, singles ministry used to be the place where young professionals who love Jesus, love the Lord, and are trying to climb the corporate ladder could meet. Most churches in most American cities, North American cities, that's what you had. So, if you're in Chicago, if you're in Dallas, if you're in Atlanta, if you're in Indianapolis, if you're in Nashville, there are two or three churches that were the it churches. So then when you start breaking it down by race, for the black church in particular, that was the place that you went. Instead of going to the club, once you guys say you were at the singles conference, you were at the singles meeting, you were at having brunch and breakfast with a group of other like-minded singles. What changed in that process is the church in general, the black church in particular, started having what was called premarital counseling. And anytime two relatively attractive, relatively successful people just had any type of potential interest, they ran them down the aisle by first getting them to go through potential leaders. But no, 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 don't do that. Let's go to premarital because God needs you to be married if you guys are going to lead, and you guys can have an awesome ministry. So there were all these fairy tales that were attempted to be manufactured that were not authentic. And we saw people running down to premarital classes that had no business getting married because they didn't even pass the line test that we talk about. They weren't a man or a woman. They were at best a male or a female. And those two don't have not overcome the emotional trauma. So they bring all of the stuff and the baggage from their secular dating world into the church. Now, into the church, the teaching from a dating standpoint was pretty much everything around abstinence, no sheets, no sheets, no cloths, no pillowcases, uh, closed legs, get fed. It was all of these narratives that were being pushed and promoted that really didn't have anything to do with the call of Jesus, because Paul said in the Bible, it's better for you to stay single. But if you're gonna burn up with desire, it's better you ought be married than to burn through sin. So Paul in the New Testament, who was single and had the spiritual gift of celibacy, wanted people to be like him, but he knew the truth. You're gonna have to go at least get married. And part of the thing that got missed is there was no real alignment. So people were running down the aisle. All my friends in the 2000s ran down the aisle. Late 90s. Everybody, I was at weddings left and right. Everybody was running down the aisle from the church. And then in the 2000s, 2010, it started hitting. The divorce rate skyrocketed in the church because people who associated themselves with this narrative in the church in general, Black church in particular, were attached to a prosperity message, were attached to a name it and claim it message, were attached to Jesus wants your happiness message, and they never got into anything related to the work that's required as a Christian. Marriage is the number one ministry that any Christian will have. Let me say that again. Marriage is the number one ministry that any Christian will have. Your marriage, God won't even let you do stuff if your marriage ain't right. He will literally block blessings on top of blessings and opportunity on top of opportunity if you are not in alignment with him as a Christian with your marriage. So let's take that step. Let's take that a step back and say, what does that mean for me as I'm single and as I'm dating? If you can't line up with a person and make your marriage the number one ministry so God can show his love through the two of you, you have no business getting married. And that's the difference between my teachings at TMG and the teachings that I have within the church.
My early 2000s, I want to say. I was in the church and I was in the singles ministry. And I remember what I went through
Yeah.
and the conversations and the expectations and you're going to see a lot of attractive women train, but God first.
Well, the women
Right?
you were meeting, God told them in a dream that I'm your wife and you my husband. There was a lot of false teaching around that. The law first mentioned basically states God intent for it. The first relationship between a man and a woman was a marriage. I'm sorry. Adam was fruitful and multiplying. He had a job. He had a personal relationship with Jesus. He had friends that looked like donkeys and bears. He had goons on his side. He was prosperous. And God said that man doesn't need to be alone. So I'm going to go ahead and create for him a suitable helper. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, I'm going to create a suitable, strong, independent boss babe. I'm not going to create a modernized version of a cow. I'm not going to give you a different version of a giraffe or a lioness. I'm going to give you a woman because she was taken out of man. And remember, a lot of people miss this. In Genesis, God had man and woman on his mind, even though he created man first. So his intention was always to create woman. It just took Adam getting into position for him to be able to receive what God had for him. And too many in the church, especially in the 2000s, we weren't ready. I'll speak to myself as well. We weren't ready. We had no business near an altar. We had no business near a premarital class. We had no business near a relationship that would have that serious undertones because we hadn't done the work. So, and the church had not equipped us. Yeah, you got singles ministry, but if the marriage ministry ain't coming alongside two or three young men and young women and teaching them the truths about the word of God as it relates to what it takes to be in a marriage, then you don't have an effective singles ministry. You have a singles mixer. You have a singles group or a professional networking group. Because the goal of being in a singles ministry within the church, any denomination, should be helping you understand and identify your purpose in your singleness. Because once you stop being single and you get married, God shifts it and your marriage becomes priority.
And I think that's what happened to a lot of people because as I exited out in the time frame that you mentioned, the protection of the church for those who are single and looking to get married, it seemed to be missing for a lot of people. And a lot of people were, as the old saying goes in the Bible, unevenly yoked. They're trying to
Mm,
serve two masters because they were getting pumped these ideas of you had to, not you had to, you could have been strong, independent. You don't need the other person. Where in the church now that they were still attending, it was saying that you need the other person. You have to understand the duty. You have to understand the role. And there was like this conflict, not only internally with a lot of people through my observation, but externally because the Saturday or the Sunday, when they congregate, they had their protection, right? The religious
mhm,
seal, the sword, the helmet, the breastplate, everything. When they went into the world now, they were not prepared for what the word offered. And I think that's where some people get lost. And then when they started to bring it into the church, the mosque, the synagogue,
mhm,
they started to spread it. And then instead of the vocal minority, I think they became the majority. And that's what happens to what we see today, where it's so rampant. And maybe the men and the women don't understand how far it's come because they've always been living in the chaos.
mhm. Well, there was a time, well, stepping back in the Word of God itself, New and Old Testament, there was modern day heresy and theology that took a hold of each version of the church. It was when they came out of Israel and came out of Egypt and to go and create Israel. When they went back, when the new churches were being put throughout the Middle East and Asia, there was always the pagan, it was the word for everyone, for all the Bible theologians, the pagan theology was something that was being brought into the church. That is not new. What is new is the visibility of it since about the 1990s to today. When we had the expansion of the prosperity gospel message, we watered down Jesus. We watered down the blood. We watered down the crucifixion, the death, the burial, the resurrection. We watered down the Holy Spirit, and we watered down God. And so what we started doing were taking theories that were really capitalistic theories and applied them into the word in order to get a what is called a sweet ear, to get a word to the sweet ear. It's something that people want to hear. People want to hear, oh, I have problems. We all have problems, but we have a God who understands that we can meet our needs exceedingly abundant. It's really easy to hype people up on that versus talking about, well, your problem is your happiness. You are too focused on happiness, which you have made an idol. So God can't get nothing out of you. So before you come into the church talking about, I need God to provide for me, he can provide. He is a provider. He's the same today, yesterday, and forevermore. We all know that. But you can't come into a church situation, stay, and be in that selfish mindset. So in the prosperity gospel message, it also aligned with in North America specifically, the increase in the expansion of the economy. So people were getting job opportunities, men and women, that were not available 20 years earlier. And because they were in the church, it was associated with God's blessing. Not to say that it's not God's blessing, but there were economic factors from the late 80s to the 90s that led to the run up we had until the tech bubble burst. And what ended up happening, the theology by the leaders incorrectly tried to mimic and match that. You're doing well professionally, that's God. Come over here and give me that tithe. You doing well in your business, that is Jesus. His favor is on you. Come over here and I need you to serve and sponsor this conference. That's why we have so many. There's going to be a sharp decline in the prosperity, grandiose, multi-location, non-denomination affiliated churches. There is a move by the people to go back into a smaller community-based church because in our history as a country, that's where we had the most power. In our history, that's where we had families aligned. In our history, that's where we had cultures and subcultures aligned. And then once we spread out and we went to 400 acres in Dallas, Texas, and 600 acres off of the I-5 in Los Angeles, we missed the community aspect and the community impact, and it became about that. What I believe you're talking about is something that I shared, I think it was 2022, and I formulated it. The church is in dire straits because it feels more like a neoliberal think tank group than people who are preaching the word of God, through the gospel of Jesus Christ, through the death, burial, and the resurrection. What do I mean by that? It has morphed in most instances. It looks like the world versus the church being the light and being the salt so that we can be the ones to provide what God needs back to the people. And what ends up happening and why we see a lot of people leaving the church in general, the Black church in particular, is that there's a move to preaching and teaching that doesn't promote the family. It doesn't promote headship. It doesn't promote Jesus as Lord and Savior. It promotes the pastor. It promotes the church location. It promotes the event schedule. It promotes the local little community and the little supports. And it promotes the celebrity and the fame component more so than promoting the things that are of God. And those are all idols, and idols will be torn down.
So if the church is a pillar of marriage, what do you believe has been replaced by it in the marriage today?
It is, I think it would be self ideology and self importance. So for the audience, God created marriage. I don't know if I agree, but the government should have no business being in marriage. Marriage should be between a man, a woman, and God, because those as my wife's good friend said at our wedding, 1 + 1 + 1 is one. The myself, her, and God, that creates a marriage. That's one. And God doesn't even look at us separate. When I'm acting up, she feels the brunt of it. When she acting up, I feel the brunt of it. And this is deep teaching for your people. So if they don't like it, I mean, if someone's a reverend and he's been spent 15 years of seminary, he can come smack my hand. But when you have the marriage created by God, ordained by God, led by God, it has to have God at the center. And God at the center in the Christian church is through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. In other religions, is other things. I'm not going to talk about them. But what has replaced that is the self ideology and the self importance of what I want. People have entered marriage incorrectly, thinking it's about them and their happiness. So when people are even planning an engagement, they're not planning an engagement with God in mind, who created it. They're planning their own ideas, their own thoughts, their own desires, their own plans to have a ceremony that looks good to the world. And the world don't care nothing about marriage. We've seen that. There's been a breakdown of marriage, and there's really been a breakdown of traditional marriages. So with a breakdown of that and with self-importance ruling, that is what you get in the church now. That is why in the church in general, the Black church in particular, you see a lot of families leaving. There are three types of families that are at a church. There's a older family with high school, college age kids. There's single mamas with 1, 2, 3, 4 kids. And then there are other people, young families that are leaving. Those are the families. And if you want me to add a fourth, it is grandma, mama, auntie, daughter. They all go to brunch after service. The man has been removed and the man has been escaped, and the pastor takes the place of the man, because the pastor's word is what those women in the final group go talk about all week.
I saw
Not what God said, not what Jesus said in the word. It's like, oh, my pastor said this today. Oh, it was so good. And too many preachers right now want to be clippable. They want to be on X, they want to be on YouTube, and they want to have a nice clip that goes out and goes on fire. The pastors that I follow, that I see that are really out here doing God's work, they ain't worried about being on social media. They ain't worried about getting canceled. They ain't worried about triggering and hurting your feelings, because Jesus did not come to worry about hurting your feelings. He came to change the way that everything was done in the world. He died as our savior. So if he ain't worried about it, and pastors are not worried about it, this is why churches are attracting what they're attracting.
I think, to counter what you said a little bit, I think it went from the two people and the religion in the center, like you mentioned. I think
Mm-hmm.
religion has been replaced by the government, and the government or the state has
Mm-hmm.
promoted what you said, the self importance and the self ideology, especially when you see it now, because there's basically three levels of union. There's marriage, there's ceremony, city hall, things like that, and then you have common law. To me, the common law
Mm-hmm.
was always people who weren't necessarily very religious. That was their outlet. Because
Mm-hmm.
ideally, someone who's very religious wouldn't go common law unless circumstances or finances prevented that they were living together and they ultimately got married. But they would ultimately get married in the short term. It wouldn't be they were living together for 10 years. And then, hey, you think about getting married, it wouldn't be something that's on the back burner. But one thing I also want to highlight that you mentioned is you have people, specifically men in the Black church, leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing a sermon where the pastor, he did a fantastic job. I forget his name, but he did a fantastic job. He said, "Well, all the single women stand up." And they all stood
Mm.
up. And then he said, "Well, all the single men stand up." And they stood up. And he said, "Ladies, they're your future husbands." The strange thing about that was the women outnumbered the men,
Yeah.
right?
So the
So
women are outnumbering men in most spaces like that. So in community impact spaces, and I think here's the downside to it. So if you are a man who's a heterosexual Christian, God fearing, loving man who is single, you if you wanted to do what we do and what we talk about at TMG Book Series and find you a modern woman, a traditional woman, or a high value woman, you're gonna find her at church. Because if she is not, and she's a city girl, she's only gonna be there every other week. If she's a female, she's only gonna be there when her emotions allow her to be there. So when you start going into spaces and moving into spaces, you're going to have no choice. You're going to run into women. This is what I talk about when I say the 6 month rule is when you're someone as a man, and I'm talking to the men in particular, and you're like, I want to get a better relationship outcome. You put your head down. One of the things I say is go find religion. I say go find Jesus. You go to church in 6 months. Once you get there and join, they're going to put you in stuff. They're going to be calling you. And then everybody's going to see it. And you're going to have people having conversations about you that you have no idea are having conversations about you. Single men. And then you're going to look up and somebody's finally going to be bold enough to come step to you. You've done the work for the previous 6 months. So now you know I'm not about to fall for the foolishness. You'll be able to hear if she is a city girl, hear if she's a gal, hear if she's a female, and that's where you cut them off. Don't do what the world says do, just smash and dash. That's why a lot of women in those three groups are frustrated with the market, the dating market, because they're getting modern men, traditional men, and in some instances, high value men to give them attention, but not intention. This is happening in the church too. These women who come in and they meet a guy who's single, they are like, oh, it's great. God talked about it. They slip up and then the guy moves on. It's not, the church ain't exempt. The church has its faults. And in the instance of that for men, that is where you're going to get the best outcome is if you put your head down, go to church, and then you spend 6 months there, put your head down again, another 6 months, spend another time there, don't entertain anyone, and then just get to know someone versus doing what the world does. But to your point about kind of the three levels of marriage, I really like that common law will throw out because common law happens because of the state. We see a lot of that on the West Coast here in the United States. We see a lot of that on the Northeast. But the marriage is, again, it's supposed to be between God, the man, and the wife, and the woman. It's not supposed to be between the state. So that's why you see, I'm in the South. You see some people who say, we've been married 25 years. They don't have one piece of paper. They went through the ceremony in the late 80s with their pastor at their church, and they never filled out the paperwork. She never officially changed her last name. But they have been married and God acknowledged it. If you look at the law first mentioned, there was never a marriage ceremony. There was never a wedding ceremony. There was never any paperwork with the courthouse. There was never going down to the justice of the peace, which you call ceremony. It was all between that man and that woman. And in particular, in the Old Testament, it was between the families. It was between the two head of the families, the two men would make a deal. My son, your daughter, let's expand our territory. They would have a ceremony, they would have a wedding feast, and then they would go off and live together and have 100 kids. That ain't what we got now. We're lucky if we get one kid. And two, what we have is what I don't like. Yep, the balloons, no. What the government is in business for the government. The government's job is taxes. So let's just call it what it is. It's tax season right now in the United States. So the government is going to do as much as they can to collect as many taxes to be able to pay for the needs of to keep the government running. That's the government. If no one understands the civics class, that's government. So you have county, city, so that would be local. You have state, which would be our states and our territories. In Europe, that would be countries and then their provinces. And then you have the federal government. All four of them take their cut. So all four of them have incentive to either keep you single and spending or to get you married and tax you out the wazoo. So never in anywhere do I believe, as we're talking about people in the church looking for marital outcomes or better relationship outcomes, should they even consider the government piece of it. The government, you got to fill out the paperwork just so you can get benefits, fine, but don't look at it as the government because the government sits on the shoulders of Jesus Christ, not the other way around.
So as we close, Glenn, what's some final last words that you want to share with my audience today?
Stay single, don't get married. Y'all too selfish.
Just like that.
I know. I mean, I love that. I say that all
After
the
all
time.
that.
No, after all that, no, it's just so like as you kind of talk through and alluded, I want people to understand the heart of the matter. The goal of what we're talking about here and the goal of what we talk about over on our channels is to get people into better dating outcomes. Dating is a requirement to start in order to start talking about getting the next step, which are great marital outcomes. You can't get a great marital outcome without a great dating outcome. So for your audience, if you're struggling, if you're on the fence, if you're in the church and you don't think that you're getting the outcome that you want, it ain't Jesus's fault. Find another church. Your relationship outcome is important to God. It is not God's reason for creating you. He is trying to get a purpose out of you. And too many times in the church, we mix up the two and we miss God and we miss the plan for his life. And then we blame an individual that God never had for us as the one that we were supposed to be committed to in the first place. So stay vigilant, stay on channels like this, get the content like this, continue to buy my book. Thank you guys for your support on that and supporting these channels. But I think we got a long way to go in any space to help people get the relationship outcomes that they want. Remember, it's all about what we believe here is know who you are, know what you want, know what you qualify for, and know with who you qualify for what they want from you. You will be able to get the great dating outcome you've wanted in a modern world.